getting back all of our territories. We need weapons to protect our people.
Великої руйнації зазнали українські міста. І Україна переможе тоді, коли кожне українське місто буде відбудоване.
My husband defended Mariupol. Now he is in captivity. When he returns home, that will be a victory for me.
Ми зараз з мамою живемо у Німеччині та дуже хочемо додому. Після перемоги повернемося додому.
Перемога наступить лише тоді, коли Україна відновить свій аграрний потенціал, що зможе зберегти Україну та світ від голоду.
Russians use the forbidden weapons. They torture civilians and the military. Victory means punishing Russia for the war crimes.
Victory will come when Russian occupation doesn't threaten anymore to Ukraine and Europe as a whole.
For me, victory is our opportunity to join EU and NATO because Ukraine chose a free world.
Навіть у повній темряві ми бачимо правду і будемо битись, поки не потемніє у наших очах. Бо ми – воїни світла, і сьогодні ніхто на землі не зможе сказати, що ця репліка – пафос.
In Warsaw, with the very, very kind help and assistance of our partners, Pulaski Foundation, whom we actually called our guardian angels, who helped us very much to set up all these logistical issues to make sure that we can start our advocacy efforts right away. Because everybody of you remember that during the first days, everybody was talking about possible Ukraine's failure in 3 days, then maybe in 1 week, then maybe in 2 weeks. So our advocacy efforts were aimed at convincing our partners that Ukraine is capable of winning and should be supported to the maximum to get this victory done. We are extremely grateful to all of our partners. We are very grateful to our donors. We are very grateful to our international partners, to our Ukrainian partners from the civil society, from the government. We, as the Center for Ukrainian Victory, serve as the coordination platform for different civil society experts and activists who have the capacity, who have the networks, who have the expertise in the international advocacy. And all of our skills, all of our time, 24/7, is right now dedicated at achieving an advocating Ukrainian victory. Before I pass the floor to Daria Kaleniuk to explain what is this victory in our understanding, I have to say that these discussions today will be live broadcast. Because most of the roundtables are Chatham House, that's important to stress about it separately. So Daria, what is Ukrainian victory according to our understanding?
Ukrainian victory for us is was partly depicted in this video, but it is based on a few pillars. First, it's control of all Ukrainian territories by Ukrainian armed forces. And all Ukrainian territories means territories as of December 1991, internationally recognized territories. So it means that Russians must leave our sovereign territory. Second, there have to be security guarantees to prevent possibility for new Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities, on Ukrainian schools, and possibility for Russians to occupy and commit more atrocities and genocide in Ukraine. So it means arming Ukraine enough to prevent additional attacks. Third, it's EU integration. For us, being member of the EU for Ukraine is part of Ukrainian victory. Marshall Plan for Ukraine or rebuilding Ukraine and having enough funds to reconstruct all those losses and build even better Ukraine. And finally, we believe that the evil must be punished. We think that without punishment for Putin and his regime and all those war criminals who are committing genocide in Ukraine, victory can't be possible. Russia and Russian regime must be punished, and Russia must pay for all those losses they did and committed in Ukraine. So this is our vision of recipe of victory, and for this goal we are functioning, and for this purpose we have created the International Center of Ukrainian Victory.
Всім доброго ранку. Thank you for coming to the presentation of International Center for Ukrainian Victory. And what I would add, during the Warsaw Security Forum, there are many debates after successful counter-offensive. And one of the issues we raised yesterday with High Representative of US is what is the next goal of Ukraine. And what was really nice to hear that Crimea is achievable goal for next year. So if like 8 months ago, after the full-scale escalation, there were doubts how Ukraine could defend our territories, are we capable to liberate territories in Kherson, Kharkiv regions? But now we are not talking about compromises, concession, or peace negotiations. We are talking about how to achieve, I think, key and strategic goal, to restore territorial integrity and sovereignty in the internationally recognized borders 1991. So I'm sure that Crimea is achievable goal, and with more weapons is achievable not next year. I'm probably too optimistic, but we are advocating for strengthening Ukrainian armed forces because our best and brightest defenders now fighting for the freedom, dignity of the whole world. Geopolitical importance of Ukrainian victory, what we also see here, how people from Belarus, Belarusian opposition, they are now planning how they are using the momentum of Ukrainian victory for building strong Belarus. Also people in Georgia, in Moldova. So Ukraine's victory means a lot for our neighbors, and not neighbors close to our borders, but also for our our friends in Taiwan and other places in our planet. So we achieved a lot within 8 months of more than 8 years of Russian ongoing aggression, which we do believe will be recognized as a genocide, not by Canada, but by the whole world. And thanks everyone who helped us to achieve important goal like a candidate status we received in June. Also, we shift from Soviet junk to NATO standard weapon, and we will, continue, and we hope that fighter jets F-16 will be, Ukrainian armed forces will be, and air forces will be equipped. And I'm just seeing Maria, the biggest cargo airplane. And so we have a dream that, as yesterday the Prime Minister of Lithuania mentioned, that every inch of Ukrainian territory will not be just free from Russian occupiers, will be rebuilt. And I think it's also one of our strategy and International Center for Ukrainian Victory. We are also working very hard on developing a strategy as a part of post-victory agenda, how to rebuild our country with accountability, transparency, and we will do our best that Ukraine become a true, a role model, how we could win the war and after the war to become a true example of how democracies could advance their importance.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. And I have to tell you a few things about our future plans, very short-term plans during the next half a year, but it's very, very optimistic from one hand. From another, on early stage of the spring, nobody believed that we will talk about Ukrainian victory at all. So that's why, as Hanna mentioned about democracy, democracy is not a state of being, it's a process of becoming. And for us, peace is not a state of being, it's a process of becoming. And we have to fight for the peace not only on a battlefield, but for the future. That's why we are going to fight for establishing a special tribunal because of act of aggression. Our colleagues on the field in Ukraine and here, we establish a special center for documentation of war crimes. We are going to join the civil society in Ukraine and abroad to help them to have enough voices on international platforms and to promote the idea about this special tribunal. We believe that we have to invest as much patience to development our justice system on the local jurisdiction and international jurisdiction on the level of ICC, but without such type of tribunal, Ukraine will not have peace, because justice or punishment, it's not about revenge. It's about future generation, because Soviet Union was not punished after that crimes which were doing against Ukrainians and other nations. We have perspective on the inside the Putin's mind about rebuilding of this unity. Now, that's why we have this war. And I saw today the new narratives that justice is versus peace. But according to our position, it's not true. We have to fight for peace and to have justice at the end of the battlefield. That's why I believe that you will help us to promote this idea, and please join the discussion at 12 p.m. with our general prosecutor here and other participants. Then we are going to fight for new sanctions, and Russia is state of terrorism. That's why we hope that our partners will help us to promote the idea and adopt the decision on political level to call Russia as a state of sponsor of terrorism, or to develop new vocabulary for new reality with current Russia. This authoritarian regime has to be punished. And of course, our center is going to continue promote some needs which we have on the ground, and it's not only about military supply, it's about general perspective to rebuild Ukraine. That's why we have to develop the plan about recovery together with civil society, not just on some of platforms. And last but not least, we believe that Russians have to think about future too, and not to be too selfish, not just to think about their comfortability in EU or Canada, on the USA. I'm talking about opposition and civil society and other active groups. That's why we promote idea to develop exit strategy for new Russia after Putin authoritarian regime, but from Ukraine. Because it's about economical issue, it's about changes to their constitution, it's about migration programs, because you know that we have more than 400,000 of Russians which were relocated from Russia to Crimea after 2014. And it's about history, it's about culture. So we have long-term plans, and we hope that you will help us to promote these ideas and help us to establish new platform for new order, because we need it, because Russia broke the last peace decision after the Second World War. Thank you. Slava Ukraini!
So, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you very much again for being with us, and let's mobilize all the efforts to advance our victory and to have it as fast as possible. And let's now have a short recap of our 8 months fight in the next video.
Принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Ну, максимум 3-4.
Kiev could be encircled and fall to the Russians within 24 hours. They could be in the hands of the Ukrainian military.
Troops reclaimed more than 1,100 square miles.
Saying she cried when she saw Ukrainian soldiers.
Слава Україні!
Thank you. Now I'm passing the floor to the moderator of our next session, Mr. Michal Schneider, who will basically guide you through the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to see so many people here. We will begin shortly. Now, I would like to kindly request our participants to please come here so we can begin our panel. Mr. Yes, Zagorodniuk, Mrs. Tasheva, and Mrs. Radina, please come here. We will begin in 1 minute. And I think we need one more microphone for 4 people. Oh, you have one. Okay, we're good. Okay. Yes. Please come here, yes. Good morning. Hello, good morning. Okay, so we are ready to begin. My name is Michał Schneider. I'm a senior news anchor at TVN24 and TVN24 Biz, the leading Polish news channels. I focus on international affairs, and we have some astonishing guests tonight for this extremely important topic: defending Ukraine's support for military efforts and future security guarantees. The participants of this panel are Anastasia Radina, head of the Anti-Corruption Committee, Ukrainian Parliament, servant of the people Ukraine. Good morning. Good morning. Tamila Tasheva, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, Ukraine. Good morning. And Andriy Zagorodniuk, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Center for Defense Strategies, Ukraine. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for being here. So let's start with perhaps the most crucial question right now, given the significance of what's going on, the barbaric Russian invasion of your country. When we talk about the international support, the efforts, how would you rate it? What's working? What are you satisfied with? And what needs improving? What is your point of view? Perhaps MP Radina. it should be on.
Good morning, everyone. Rating, I think this is probably one of the most difficult questions because as Ukrainians, we always seem to be dissatisfied and asking for more. I would say, while we are very grateful for all the support we have already received, we are still seeing political barriers towards provision weapons that Ukraine now crucially needs in order to be able to do counteroffensive and actually liberate all the territories, not for the sake of territories per se, but for the sake of people who are living on these territories. Because in every town we liberate, we actually see torture, murder, signs of deportation, we see collective burials, we see bodies that we cannot even recognize, we see bodies mutilated beyond recognition, we see all the things that no one should have been seeing, frankly speaking, in 21st century in no piece of the world, especially in the center of Europe. So I would, although I already said we are grateful, which is something we sometimes forget to say, we are still in a situation of 50-50. Because the most crucial capacities we need, modern tanks for counter-offensive, longer-range missiles to be able to, for example, hit the stocks of Iranian drones, these are still lacking, unfortunately, and we have been in lots of technical discussions why this or that is possible or not possible. My conclusion is barriers towards provision of these types of weaponry are still political, and these barriers must be removed, not just for the sake of Ukraine, but for the sake of giving a very clear message to Putin and all the dictators of the Club of Dictators that blackmailing does not work and the international order will still be protected by the Club of Democratic Countries.
Representative Tasheva.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Actually, my main mandate, of course, it's work on Crimea and elaboration of Crimea. But, of course, the main task for all our country and for our armed forces, of course, it's the occupation all of our territories, elaboration our territories which now under occupation of Russia, and of course we do not do it, unfortunately, without more weapons, without strengthening sanctions against Russian Federation, because now we see these new so-called referendums on our temporary not controlled territories in Zaporizhia, in Kherson region, in Donetsk and Luhansk, and of course since 2014 in Crimea. And of course after these so-called referendums, this farce, we must strengthen these sanctions against Russia also.
Minister Zagorodnik, what's your opinion in terms of what has been enough so far and what needs improving?
Thank you and good morning. So first of all, we need to understand that all military assistance, and I will just talk about the military assistance, because there are many other types. It's been shaped by the certain understanding of the strategic environment, and most of all the notion of the escalation. So all countries were planning the assistance in order not to create escalatory effect. We can argue about how relevant it was at different periods of time because that whole concept was developing over time. But the adoption of the small step strategy took place, so the assistance was given in some kind of batches and installments, so that Ukraine can actually work with that equipment and adopt it and train and put it to work, but also that none of these steps serve as become an escalatory event. And that strategy worked out. Of course, now we have mobilization, we have annexation of so-called annexations of the territories, which is an escalation, but it happened when Ukraine already has a critical mass of equipment ready, so we do the counteroffensive. So from that perspective, we got enough, because we do have a critical mass and we do have a successful counteroffensive. Is this like, we don't need more? Of course not, we do. because we still have some troops which lack modern equipment, and we still have some issues with the ammunition, and we still have some issues with some certain systems. So the assistance shall keep going, but what we know from our key allies, this is a plan. So they don't plan to stop it. So I think that right now, with the understanding how the assistance is shaped, we're more or less on the same page. Of course, we have certain systems which we would like to receive, like combat aviation, for example, but it's not on the table at the moment. So we're still working on this, and there are some other types of weapons. But generally, we are with our key closest allies of the Rammstein format, we're on the same page where we need to go, except one thing. We still don't have the political goal of this coalition. So political goal has been defined as not to let Russia win, not to let escalatory events happen, and not to start the World War III, and so on and so on. But the definition of the victory is not yet adopted as a constructive goal among the coalition members. And that's for the next step for us, is to say, okay, let's constructively decide where we're going. How do we need to address Russia and what we want at the end? And we need to be on the same page about that. So I think that's the next step which we will see coming up soon. Thank you.
Thank you for those important answers. And another question that needs to be asked is about the other side of this matter, and that is, what obstacles do you see? Arguably, perhaps, it might be the citizens of those allied countries perhaps being tired of what they might see as sacrifices. For example, the more expensive energy and other things. Are you concerned that the solidarity and the support from Western societies might soon end? And if yes, what would you say to those people who might think we've suffered enough for Ukraine? And I'm exaggerating, of course, for the point of discussion. What are your thoughts? Representative Tasheva.
Thank you. We have a lot of meetings, and even here in Warsaw Security Forum with MPs of different countries. Of course, we have a lot of meetings in other countries and with ordinary, to say, people who drive in a taxi, in an Uber. Actually, we have really support from citizens in all of the world. Of course, these citizens pushed on their government, and it's also very important because these governments in countries of our partners, of course, thinking about it, this support from citizens of these countries, and give us more and more support on political level, and of course with arming our country for defense and for our defense. Of course, we must understand that after that Russia also work hard with citizens of these countries also, and they share different propaganda even now against Ukraine. They say it's a choice of, for example, in occupied territories, it's a choice of people, but it's not true. And we must, of course, work with citizens in countries of our partners. It's very important.
Minister Zagrodniuk.
We all know that the war fatigue is one of the big factors, particularly in continental Europe and in some other nations. We can define a war fatigue as the frustration that with a protracted war, with a war which takes longer than the citizens would like to see, and blaming sometimes Ukraine for that.
Blaming the victim.
Yes. Well, let's just look at this from perspective that we all understand why, and we all understand that, of course, people are frustrated with the war. But the most frustrated nation with the war is actually Ukrainians, and we want that war to end more than anyone else in the world. except that we understand that the only way to finish the war is to win. Because concessions are not going to bring peace, and ceasefire will give Putin just a recovery time in order to start another season of that war. That's what's going to happen if we give some partial solution. So we need to aim for the victory, and that's how we finish it, and that's how our suffering will end, and that's how the frustrations of the European community will end. So what we'll need to do is we need to explain to the citizens of and the population of those countries, and that the best way to resolve that is to convert that negativity into the faster victory. And let's just win this, finish it, and restore normal lives.
MP Radina, what are your thoughts? How can this Western European war fatigue be countered?
I would probably disagree a bit with my colleagues. I am not that much worried, frankly speaking, about ordinary people. Why? Because people were actually the first ones to stand on the side of Ukraine. People, not the politicians, but ordinary people on the streets, ordinary people watching their TV at homes and listening to their radio, were the first ones to clearly define right from wrong and good from evil and see who is the aggressor and who is the victim here. And these were people who were taking the first steps to pressure their elected officials, for elected officials to then pressure administrations and to get the flow of support to Ukraine running. What I am worried about are administrations and elected officials. I'm worried that it is their perception that people would want everything to end so that life goes back to normal. It is their perception that we still need to, be wary of not escalating with Russia. It is their perception that, or I would rather say, it is politicians' failure to be failure in actively countering Russia's propaganda. So what I am worried about is governments falling to Russia's blackmail, governments trying to still consider the notion of not escalating in decision-making on providing Ukraine with heavier weapons. I am still worried about governments falling to Russia's energy blackmail, and we are 100% sure that as Russia is failing on a battlefield, they would increasingly use the only instrument they have used and the main instrument that had never failed them, and this is blackmailing, energy blackmail, nuclear blackmail, and information warfare and propaganda. These are three key things we need to be aware of, we need to counteract, and with that we need to stand strong against, as I would say one of the most cold winters in decades is falling upon us, not only upon Ukrainians, but also, of course, on Western societies. So my message again is simple. It is very important to finally let Russia know that their blackmailing is not working. And this is the only way how we stop this blackmailing. If not, we will be in these addictions for decades to come. Citizens will be in a situation of sacrificing for decades to come. Is this the world order we were aiming towards? No.
Thank you very much. Those are very interesting and important points that you have all raised, so I thank you for those answers. Another question is regarding the future, and one thing I must personally say is how impressed I am, because I have had the privilege of speaking to many Ukrainians in the past few months, and almost all of them talk about the future. You are all confident you will win, and you are already creating, you are architects of the future of your country after this madness ends. My question now is, how confident are you in terms of the future of future security guarantees? On the one hand, Ukraine wants to join NATO. On the other hand, in the past, for example, the Budapest Memorandum has failed. How confident are you when it comes to future security guarantees? Perhaps Minister Zagorodniuk first.
I honestly don't like the word guarantees, because guarantee means that somebody underwrites your problem and essentially provides you a solution. And unless we're a member of NATO, which I believe someday will happen, but unfortunately we cannot exactly say when that happens, I don't think any guarantees would be actually functional, unless this is a very clear construction of Ukrainian capabilities. Because the best deterrent for the enemy is readiness, is a military readiness. Readiness, it means that you can take challenge at any point of time, and you have a certain capabilities which are reasonably enough to do that. If somebody guarantees you some solution, let's look at realities, how that may work. So it takes years to build and deploy the air defense system. It takes years to build combat aviation and train pilots. It takes years to ramp up production, so the production is ready to produce necessary amount of the artillery units and so on. So which country is going to guarantee that to Ukraine? But more importantly, even if we receive some assurances from the third countries, unless we have that and those capabilities are ready to fight, they're not going to work as a deterrent for Russia, because Russia may be trying to attack us while we're still ramping up our defense. So that's why, from this perspective, I think the best guarantee is to build up a strong military, which would be strong enough to make such a damage to the aggressor that they obviously are not trying again. And that's I believe that's the only guarantee I believe in until we are a member of NATO. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Radina.
Let me put it this way. I think first and the most guarantee for long-standing security of Ukraine would be Ukrainian victory. That would, of course, as we've said a number of times, require proper supply of heavy weaponry now, and would, of course, require a tribunal for all those responsible to be brought to liability, not only for crimes against humanity, but also for the premier crime of aggression. Why am I saying that this is the Ukrainian victory is a key security guarantee? Because showing in the club of democratic countries to the club of dictators that aggression cannot be successful, that aggression will not be tolerated by civilized world, that all aggression will receive its proper answer, is the most important deterrent for any future efforts of any country, not just Russia, to even consider starting a war against other nation. Thank you.
Representative Tasheva, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Budapest Memorandum, if you say about it, it's a lot of articles and books which we have why Budapest Memorandum is not work, and it's actually in a past. Very important to say that in this memorandum, Russia is one of the sides of this memorandum, and why its memorandum is do not work actually, and why Russia is attacked our country. And I totally agree with my colleagues that the main guarantees of guarantees it's our victory, and it's our strengthening of our Ukrainian armed forces, because we don't have any way. We have only way to victory, to also to destroy this. To destroy also Russia, and we must to speak and have a communicate this existing strategy of Russia. And I agree also with my colleague Olga Vazovska. She mentioned about it. It's very important, because when we say about what we do after our victory and after the occupation of our territories, we must prepare exactly steps how we do with these territories, how we communicate with our people who live in temporarily occupied territories in Crimea and in Donbas region. But of course we hope that in nearest future we elaborate our territories in Kherson and Zaporizhia and in other occupied territories, and we must do exactly steps for that.
Thank you very much. While I do have a few more questions, I see so many people here that I would love to give you an opportunity to ask those questions. So is my colleague Anna ready? Yes? Okay, so who would like to ask a question? Sir, I see you, so perhaps the gentleman in the first row. If I could kindly ask the people who asked the questions to introduce themselves and to, yes, and use the microphone.
Sure, thank you very much. My name is Jochen Bittner with the German newsweekly Die Zeit. Thank you very much for this panel. I have a question regarding maybe a sensitive aspect of victory, which is the port of Sevastopol. So the question would be, once you have regained Crimea, what is your plan for the Russian Black Sea fleet there?
Of course, in Crimea, we don't need any military of Russia. And of course, now we see how Russia used Crimea as to attack from Crimea and of course from city of Sevastopol. During this full-scale invasion, and our President Zelensky has mentioned it, near 800 missiles attacks from Black Sea region, from Sevastopol and from Crimea, on territories of Ukraine, and they destroyed, of course, civil infrastructure. And of course, we really understand that in Sevastopol we don't need it. And after the occupation, we need only our military forces in Ukraine. But how we joke with our Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine, we need in Ukraine and in Crimea so-called friendly militarization. It's very important to say it because we understand that Crimea now it's a military base. Of course, we understand that Russia also very close in Crimea, yes, in the Black Sea region, and we understand that we must to strengthening our militaries in Crimea, but not in a very aggressive way, but more in a friendly way. But of course, we need only our militaries.
Would you like to add anything to the Sevastopol question?
Our main target is to destroy Russian Black Sea Fleet, just to be clear, to inflict as much damage as possible until it stops being a factor in the war, and so it's deterred from participation in the war and stops controlling our seas, so we can restore our access to our seas. So we have enough capabilities for that. That's why Russian ships are largely keeping away from our coastal missiles. But of course, we are progressing with amassing additional capabilities in order to reach them pretty much anywhere in the Black Sea. And I believe that a few more ships will join their flagship Moscow soon. And it's just a fact. And that's pretty much, and the rest who will survive, they will probably withdraw to Russia, and then we'll start rebuilding Crimea from the scratch. Thank you.
MP Radina, anything to add?
I think Andrei summarized it perfectly.
Okay, sir, please.
Thank you, Ben Hodges from Human Rights First. For the two representatives, my question is about the 1 million plus Ukrainians who have been kidnapped and deported, scattered all over Russia. I think many of them are orphans even. How do we locate them to get them back? And then to Minister Zagorodnik, could you talk briefly about the logistical infrastructure that Ukraine is trying to establish to sustain what the operations that are happening now? Thank you.
So perhaps.
Yes, thank you for your question. First of all, it's a war crime, of course, and it's a practice of genocide against Ukrainian nation, against our people. Of course, they illegally transferred our population, not only children, of course, but our citizens via occupied territories in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast and via Crimea also. we have a lot of evidence from our citizens who displaced illegally enforced via Crimea and other occupied territories. And of course, now our government and our special envoy for the children's rights of our president work with the international community, especially because we understand that now we don't have really negotiations about it. Of course, we have a negotiation about liberation our military guys and girls, but about children, it's a little bit complicated, unfortunately. And Russia now brainwash mindsets of our children in temporary occupied territories and on orphanages in Russian Federation. They teach our children according to Russian teaching program. And now it's a really difficult situation because now they are not on our control. But we must to share this information, to highlight this issue, to communicate with our international partners and international organizations. But unfortunately, it's on the side of Russia. If they do something with this issue, it's maybe raised. Thank you.
And Piradina?
I will just add briefly, Russia is not just deporting Ukrainian citizens and Ukrainian kids to Russia. They are kidnapping, and I insist on using these words, they are kidnapping our citizens and our kids to Russia. Moreover, we actually know cases when the whole orphanage with about 100 kids has been kidnapped and deported to Russia. Moreover, they not only kidnap there from our territories, they kidnap kids from Ukrainian citizenship because they have deliberately simplified, for the lack of better word, procedure for acquiring Russia's citizenship, so that basically any interested third party can apply for Russia's citizenship on behalf of a minor, of a child, who has no say in that. The only pretext needed, if Russia actually even needs any pretext for kidnapping our kids, the only pretext needed would be that a child is not even just an orphan, but a child is left without parental care. What does that mean? If, for example, parents are held captive, if, for example, parents are also kidnapped, here we go. The child is legally considered as left without parental care, and any third party, any Gongo NGO can apply for Russia's citizenship on behalf of a Ukrainian child who has no say in that and who is therefore attempted to be withdrawn from legal protection of Ukraine. Now, our position is we do not recognize that for sure. We actually have successful cases of returning our children from Russia. Unfortunately, the number of successful cases is much, much less than the number of kids who remain kidnapped on Russia's territory. We are working on that, but as Tamila said, this is a very difficult question, especially given the citizenship issue. And let me just add here, the only way to stop that is to liberate Ukrainian territories. This example, the example of Ukrainian kids being kidnapped and forced into Russia's citizenship, is one of many that illustrates very clearly why exactly we need to liberate our territories. And there is no shortcut to that. There is no legal mechanism how we stop that until we gain our territories back and ensure all the legal protection for Ukrainian citizens on Ukrainian territories.
And sir, your question to the minister was, could you please remind us?
About the logistics, the infrastructure necessary to sustain the equipment they're receiving.
Yeah, thank you. So on sustainment, of course, if the equipment is not supported, if it doesn't have engineering and technical service, it breaks with 100% probability, and you never know when that happens. So yes, to have a capable force, we need to support it, which is in language, in the military language, it's called sustainment of the capabilities. Just explaining to the rest of the audience. Yeah, the problem is that obviously is that the manufacturers are not in Ukraine. And they're not traveling to Ukraine for security reasons, and they're not setting up their own facilities in Ukraine for security reasons, because obviously Russians will aim at those facilities as soon as they find out that they exist. So Ukraine currently develops a new approach to that. Ukroboronprom and the military are joining the forces in order to provide existing Ukrainian facilities, which can repair, and then engineers are communicating with engineers of the manufacturers in order to get necessary documentation, necessary support. Sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's physical, and tools and spares in order to support it as close to the front line as possible. Because obviously traveling, of course, some of the repairs need to be done only outside of Ukraine because of the lack of equipment and so on. So for that reason, some of the equipment will travel to here, to Poland, for example, or to some other countries. But we will try to keep this to minimum because obviously traveling throughout the whole country back and forth is not going to make that feasible, obviously. So this is a challenge. Challenge is understood. Challenge is quite serious, and we need a better communication with manufacturers. But if it's if the communication is established, then usually it goes quite well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have, I believe, time for two questions tops. So is anyone else interested in asking our esteemed guests about anything? Any questions from the audience? So in the meantime, we are all serious people, and I know that this question might sound a little bit silly, but given how much focus has been on it in the social media, I would like to ask you about what Elon Musk wrote on Twitter recently. And I'm asking only because so many people are aware of it. And you all know it, right? I presume. He talked about the Ukraine-Russia peace, about redoing the election of annexed regions under UN supervision, Crimea formerly part of Russia, as it has been since 1783, until Khrushchev's mistake. Water supplied to Crimea assured, Ukraine remains neutral. And my question is not for you to show respect to that way of thinking, but he is an influential person. He has many followers. Some people from other further countries perhaps might read that and think, that's not stupid, that's not bad. He might have a point. And as he wrote, this is highly likely to be the outcome in the end, just a question of how many die before then. So what are your thoughts? What would you perhaps say to those people who have no knowledge, don't live in this part of the world, and think, maybe he has a point? What would you say? Who wants to go first?
Maybe I started. It's a propaganda, Russian propaganda, and it's a Russian narrative, not what is Musk tweet, but it's the influence of Russia propaganda. Crimea before 1783, when Crimea first annexed by Catherine II, are Crimean Khanate. It's a Crimean Tatar lands. And if Elon Musk study history, he may be nowed, yes? Before this first annexation and started colonization of Crimea, during centuries, most population in Crimea are Crimean Tatars. After World War II and after our independence, Crimea is Ukrainian land, according to international recognized border. And we don't have any negotiations about territorial integrity of Ukraine. Crimea is Ukraine, Donbass is Ukraine. And very important that Ukraine and our government, our armed forces elaborate not only territories, but our own people. Because if Elon Musk only thinking about how to live in Crimea, in temporary occupied territories, he may be now that 150 criminal cases against our Ukrainian citizens. It's political prisoners. 111 of them are Crimean Tatars. And of course, if he's thinking about dignity, about values of freedom, maybe he do not tweet it. And we have our own way for liberation our territories, and we do not have advice from Elon Musk. It's our way, and of course we at one day, I hope in the nearest future, we will get our victory in this war.
Thank you. Since we don't have much time, I would like to kindly ask you for short answers, because we will have one more question from the audience. So please keep it short, if I may ask.
I will try to. Now, the best response I have seen as to Elon Musk's tweet was that's claiming Crimea should be returned to Russia because that was only Khrushchev's mistakes is absolutely similar to claiming that Moscow should be demolished because Yuri Dolgoruki established it by mistake. Now, I actually feel as if I am a history teacher. What Elon Musk is proposing is, first, of course, a product of Russia's propaganda. Second, how long do we have to repeat that before we realize that actually this approach has already been tested in Ukraine in 2014 when Crimea has been occupied? Did that bring peace? No. Did that deter Russia from further aggression? No. Did that preserve international order? No. Ukraine remained neutral for some period of time. I sincerely believe that the whole concept of neutrality is actually a euphemism for Russia's claiming that Ukraine is a sphere of interest. And as long as Russia is allowed to claim that, Ukraine would remain at risk, and Russia would remain in its imperial ambition to actually reconquer Ukraine and reestablish itself as empire. And many historians, many academia have wrote hundreds of pages on that issue. Unfortunately, I don't know, we don't go to schools, we don't go to universities, we ignore this concept completely. We have tried that. This does not work. The only option is for Ukraine to reconquer its territories, to send strong messages that war of aggression does not work, may not be successful in the 21st century, and no more neutrality for Ukraine joining NATO. Thank you.
Minister Zagrodniuk?
Yeah, I'll be very quick because I fully agree. Of course, history is in this case, first of all, is irrelevant. Secondly, why he selected that date? Why don't we go to 15th century or 9th century or 5th century BC? So anyway, what matters is international law, because our world order is based on international law. And according to international law, if the country is recognized, within the borders, it's irrelevant. The rest is irrelevant. And Russia recognized Ukraine in 1991, and until Putin suddenly decided that somebody made a mistake or whatever. What Putin is trying to do, he's trying to compromise the international law because he wants to create chaos in the world in which he will find his competitive advantage, which he cannot find when the world is ruled by the order. So he tries to break international order and basically in that chaos somehow to build up his empire. But we need to stick to the law. We need to remember how the world is run, and don't experiment and don't fantasize about some historical things. Concerning about the concessions, because what Musk suggested is that we concede. Concessions do not stop this war. Concessions reward Putin for his behavior. Concessions show that he can win, that he can claim a partial victory, and that will allow him to continue further. What Putin needs is a complete failure. So the precedent from this war needs to be that the aggressor fails ultimately and without any conditions. That will show the future dictators that don't go that way. That's it. Thank you.
And the final question from the gentleman in the back in the white shirt. Yes, sir. We can hear you, perhaps. Yes.
So I'm taking Plaza from Turkey. Thank you very much, first of all. And I think you just touch upon very important issues. This is misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda against, and information war against Ukraine. So The question is what we can do, how we can reinforce information campaign and what we can do to join our efforts to make clear that today what's going on in Ukraine, it's the threat for humanity, for the civilization. Like, I mean, when you buy the box of cigarette, you see the sign, the smoking kills. So we have to make it simple that Russia kills, and Russia kills not only in Ukraine, but Russia kills everywhere. And that's why ceasefire is not solution. Victory is the solution. So that's why we have to make that clear and understandable that today people that are complaining that we are pay high price, we pay high price for our previous mistakes, and we don't pay, we are investing in our future, in our peace and stability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Since we are almost out of time, a brief response, because if I understand your question correctly, is how to make sure that propaganda is countered and people around the world realize what Russia's imperial ambitions stand for, yes? So a quick response to that, please.
A few words. So thank you for the question. Indeed, we need to promote the intolerance to the breaches of international and human law. So we cannot compromise on that. And I can give you an example. After 2014, we constantly communicated with the global audience and with the global community about the issues, about the problems which Russia was doing on the occupied territories. We were talking about the concentration camp which they kept in the center of Donetsk. And I remember myself talking to some members of parliament of European nations which were nodding, which were receiving that information, and after that they were traveling to Russia to build up stable and predictable relations with Russia. So we cannot compromise, we cannot think that Russia is some sort of a case which exists in any way, and we have to live with that, and maybe we can collaborate with that. If somebody is a criminal, if somebody is a killer, let's call it a killer, and let's make sure that this person cannot have proper relations with the global community. Let's not have some sort of a double standards to the dictators and to the killers.
Tamila Tasheva, your final thoughts?
Only one method to fight against propaganda, it's true, and we must share all of information what we have, of course, about this war, about crimes against humanity, war crimes against Ukraine, and of course it's one possible way, and of course we hope to have support from our partners, from journalists in all the world about this war and sharing this true information about war in Ukraine.
Anastasia Radina, your final thoughts?
If I may, I will touch upon other issues that we plan to discuss today, but unfortunately haven't had time. And this is what would be the proper response to Russia's threats of using nukes. And I think it is high time for the world to state ahead of time what would be the response. Because the strategic ambiguity that for example, the US is using right now, unfortunately, the same has been used before the war. Did that deter war? Unfortunately not. Putin still did invade. So now it is high time to put it plain and clear ahead of time on paper, in speaking, in writing, and say, if you use nukes, here will be the reaction. The reaction will be really hard. Please calculate in advance. Strategic ambiguity does not deter anymore, so we need to make it clear to Putin. And this is the only language, the language of blunt force, that he understands. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Anastasia Radina, MP, head of the Anti-Corruption Committee, Ukrainian Parliament, servant of the people Ukraine. Tamila Tasheva, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Andriy Zagorodnyuk, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, former Minister, Center for Defense Strategies, Ukraine. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. And now I will pass the microphone to Tadeusz Iwański for the next panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tadeusz Iwański. I'm heading the Department for Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova at the Center for Eastern Studies, which is state analytical think tank. We report to the Prime Minister's office, but we also operate as a regular think tank and taking part in the conferences. It is my pleasure to chair this panel with three fundamental issues to be touched upon, like rebuilding, reforming, and Ukraine's accession to the EU. So I would like to ask Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson, to deliver the opening remarks. And then I will ask the panelists to take the floor. Yes, please, please.
So, yeah. Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Luhansk are Ukraine. The European Union will never accept the illegal annexation of Ukrainian lands. Our solidarity and support for Ukraine is unwavering. I saw part of that solidarity when I visited the EU border with Ukraine in Slovakia, Poland, Romania, the first week after Russia's invasion. The endless lines of women and children, exhausted, crossing the borders. It was heartbreaking to see the fear in their eyes, but it also the welcome was heartwarming. Here in Poland, but us actually all over Europe. People welcoming refugees from Ukraine into their hearts and into their homes. A welcome we showed as a European Union when member states unanimously agreed to my proposal to trigger the Temporary Protection Directive. That gave more than 4 million of Ukrainians immediate protection, right to housing, right to enter the labor market, and schools for children. This was an unprecedented and historic decision. Putin must lose, and he will lose. I know Putin will lose when I see the bravery of the Ukrainian people. I was in Kiev 2 months ago. I met with the women there who had returned to Ukraine, first fleeing to the European Union, and then returning home to support their country, some of them widows. I saw the bravery, the stamina, and the capacity of these women. I know Putin will lose when I think of Alexander Shapoval, dancer of the Ukrainian National Ballet, actually killed in action in September. Or the school teachers, IT specialists, or other civilians joining the Ukrainian army. Not because they love to fight, but because they are fighting for the survival of their nation. They are defending their houses, their families, their children, their wives, from murder, torture, looting, and systematic rapes that Putin is bringing to Ukraine. Bucha, Izium, names that we live on as synonyms for atrocity. I also know Putin will lose when I look at Ukraine's fighting spirit and then look at Russia, where hundreds of thousands of Russians now are leaving the country. Here in the European Union, also the security situation is getting worse. Explosions in Nord Stream, 1 and 2 that are still under investigation, Putin's mobilization, Putin's illegal annexation, Putin's nuclear threats. Danger is rising. So must our level of protection. And we must not be naive. Do you remember when Russian agents poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal with Novichok? The agents said they were simply tourists, admiring the spires of Salisbury Cathedral. And now Russia Today's boss suggests to send some professionals to admire the spires in Tallinn. We can do without such tourists. Last Friday, I put forward guidelines to make it much, much more difficult for Russians to enter into the European Union on tourist visas. Appeasement is not an option, and we know that we can't believe a word Putin says. He said he wouldn't invade, and he invaded. He said he wouldn't mobilize, and he mobilized. He said he wouldn't annex, and he annexed. We know that he is lying. Putin wants not only to destroy Ukraine, he also wants to destroy the European Union. Russian boots and trolls interfere in our democratic debates. He is using energy as a weapon, hoping that high energy bills will undermine support for Ukraine. He's trying to destroy NATO, but he is giving new life to the alliance. Finland and Sweden will soon join. Trying to divide us, he has only united us. And I think the unity and the strength of the European Union has really surprised Putin, but sometimes also ourselves, I must admit. And I think this is really what we can be proud of. But what is he so scared of? The European Union does not have an army. We don't have a navy. We don't have any air force. So what do we have? We have liberty. We have democracy. We have prosperity. And yes, we also have security. That's why people protesting against corrupt autocrats proudly carry the EU flag. While Putin annexed Ukrainian land after sham referendums, countries and people are knocking at the door of the European Union to join of their own free will. We have welcomed Ukrainian refugees into our union, and we welcome Ukraine as a candidate member state. And also Moldova and Georgia. Ukraine is paying a price that no candidate member state has ever had to pay. A price not demanded by our acquis, but by Russian aggression. Rebuilding Ukraine starts today, as does the road to membership. Whatever happens over the next weeks, months, and years, the idea of Europe will never die. The bonds forged with Ukraine will never break. And just think about, in years to come, when this war is over, when we commemorate its end after some years, Ukrainian boys and girls who found safety here in the European Union, in homes and schools, they will come back. They will meet with the families that took them in. And they will look at each other in the eye and say those words, words we have all learned in the past months of hardship, months of friendship, words that have come to mean so much. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Trying to divide us, he only united us. Thank you for that, well, in fact, political and emotional speech. Now I would like to ask the panelists to have the chairs here. Paweł Borys, who is the president of the management board of the Polish Development Fund. Olena Halushka, who is from International Center for Ukrainian Victory. We saw the presentation an hour ago, and who is, as I understand, the partner of that track at this conference. But also Olena is a board member of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, who is leading watchdog organization with Daria as executive director of that center. And I would also like to welcome Paweł Kowal, whom I saw, and he is, who is the member of Polish Parliament, who is co-chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee, former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, established expert on Russia, Ukraine, professor. I would like to move to Mr. Boris with the question. Well, the EU aspires to play the leading role in this process of rebuilding of Ukraine. What, in your opinion, should be this institutional model to facilitate this process, to best facilitate this process? Because we hear about some ideas about a special instrument for Ukraine should be established within the EU, or there should be a dedicated agency that can deal with that process. From your perspective, what could be the most effective model?
Good morning. Thank you for having me today on this panel. So first of all, of course, currently in Ukraine, we have a kind of war economy. And of course, typically economists doesn't cover this topic extensively because everybody hopes that we won't have a war. And what is important that international financial institutions such IMF, World Bank have to now, also European Commissions, have to learn how to deal and support war economy, what kind of processes taking place in such a situation. Even historically, especially IMF was restricted to provide financing for countries which are at war. So first talking about immediate assistance, which is now divided into really fast support and support provided within few months, and then we have this
fast recovery track, yeah.
Yes, this fast recovery track, and then we have rebuild process. First, we need to better understand what kind of challenge Ukraine faces today and build appropriate institutions, financing instrument, a legal framework to be able to support Ukraine here and now. Talking about reconstruction process and future road to European membership, I believe that our experience, and also this is one of the foundation of Polish Development Fund group, is that you can only count on international institutions and believe that they will solve all the problems and facilitate effectively the financing of different projects, programs during the reconstruction phase. What is very important, in my opinion, for Ukraine, that they need to create a strong local, domestic institutional framework, being a reliable and effective partner for these international institutions to be able to effectively go through this process. And after the Second World War, during the Marshall Plan, German KfW was created to facilitate smooth implementation of Marshall Plan. So Ukraine needs currently stronger local development institutions such as Development Bank, Export Insurance Agency, Investment Fund with transparent and professional institutional framework. And these institutions should be very important and active designing the programs, because they are closer to the real needs of the economy, whether this is corporate sector, municipalities, and this is actually the role also of the Polish Development Fund. So we sometimes use European Union funds, but we help to effectively distribute them, being closer to the market and understanding the needs. And in the future, these institutions could be also effective in transferring EU funds during the road to
I will ask for how Ukraine is preparing for this rebuilding of the country, but I would like to ask you about this bilateral track, Polish-Ukraine, how Poland is preparing for this process of rebuilding Ukraine.
So I believe that Poland, also from the geographical perspective, will be natural base of this reconstruction and recovery process. From the logistical perspective, in many areas, especially construction sector, you have something like such geographical rent. So you are not able to provide every goods and services from a very long distance. So Poland, especially southeastern Poland, I believe will be strong logistical base for this process. What we need, what was identified over the last few months, we need to build better interconnectivity in transportation. So whether we are talking about roads, railways, especially railways, were a kind of bottleneck in the last few months, energy connections, so generally infrastructure. And I know that these projects are progressing. Second, of course, we could share our experience with Ukrainian partners in different fields, from development institutions to the framework of distributing different European Union programs. But what we also do, we're trying to identify in the corporate sector companies which could be used during this process, whether these are construction companies or building materials companies which could supply what is needed for Ukraine for this process. But sometimes it could be in partnership also with the local partners. If European community will provide effective risk-sharing guarantees for the business, so providing some level of safety, I believe that, and what is important for Ukraine, that also Polish business would be more interested to invest in Ukraine with the benefit of the economy. Of course, now the level of the risk is substantial, so it is very difficult for the business to make such a decision, but with the proper financial instrument covering some level of risk, this would be also a natural step for Polish companies with the Ukrainian partners to more invest locally, which would also create jobs and help with the whole recovery process.
Thank you. I would like to move to Irena, and I would like to propose that we look at the subject not from the donors or investors side, but from the recipient and beneficiaries side. And well, of course, it's obvious that the needs are enormous. We see different figures, different numbers, from $250 billion to $1 trillion that President Zelensky announced a few days ago. And it's obvious that Ukrainian government has to be the part of the process of rebuilding of Ukraine. But there are also worries that the corruption practices, that intransparency in Ukraine, it has not been eradicated before the war. It has not been eradicated during the war. So How would you address this kind of worries, and how would you assess the readiness of Ukraine to absorb these amounts of money?
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right that basically, since 2014, Ukraine has undergone significant reforms. We have built from scratch the institutions aimed at fighting against corruption, investigating, prosecuting, trying corrupt crooks, which, by the way, are operating and implementing their core functions even during the wartime. So corrupt crooks are being tried and put behind bars even after February 2014. However, the recovery process will be quite a sensitive thing, and it is incredibly important to put all of the safeguards beforehand, because any corruption scandal will taint entire process. And we also need to realize that all these funds, they will not come in one tranche. And if there are the corruption scandals appear, even I'm not, I have no doubt that if any corruption scandal appear, it will be investigated, prosecuted, but the damage would be already there. So we have to put all of the safeguards in advance. What can be the safeguards? The first one is that we have to realize that Ukrainian public administration is not yet capable to absorb and to manage such big funds. If such funds enter Ukrainian state budget, at that very moment they started being the subjects to any checks and inspections from the side of non-reformed law enforcement institutions. We will reform these institutions, I'm absolutely sure, because we as the civil society received a very powerful tool and leverage to push forward these reforms, which is EU candidate status and EU accession process. And EU candidate status, which was linked to 7 steps, including anti-corruption and judicial, is already serving its goal. And some of the reforms which were politically sensitive, which were blocked by some personalities from the president's office, they are unblocked and they are already successfully working, meaning that this tool would definitely yield the necessary results. However, this will take years. This will take years to reform the security service, SBU, which is still combining counterintelligence and law enforcement functions, to reform fully prosecutor's office, to finalize the judicial reform, which is right now ongoing, which has good prospects, but it started from the very top level, and it needs to get down to the level of courts, first instance and the second instance courts. All this needs time, and recovery with all the necessary safeguards should be done right from the start properly. So our stance as the civil society is that the money should not enter the state budget, but there should be the separate donor-led institution which will manage these funds and which will pick up the contractors who will be implementing the key large infrastructure projects. We will make sure that the corruption risks are minimized and that there is much more trust from the side of the foreign companies to run and to take part in the bidding process. That's the first principle. The second important principle is that the civil society should absolutely be part of the recovery. Civil society proved to be the driver of the advocacy of the different reforms. We cannot stay aside of the processes of the recovery. Another important step is that the voice of the local communities should also be heard. Local communities should also be taken part in the prioritization of different objects and works and services, and they should have say in the decision-making process as well. Obviously, Ukraine has built from scratch a number of important digital tools, like Prozoro, for example, system. Our Ministry of Digitalization, they are real champions in building up the state in smartphone, all these tools should absolutely be also part of the recovery, but they cannot substitute the main principle, because unfortunately we may end up having a very transparent corrupt schemes with everybody condemning them and international anti-corruption agencies investigating them, but without the possibility to prevent. So our key goal is prevention of corruption, and that could be done if the funds would be managed by the donor-led institutions.
Thank you. You said about the civil society role in that process. You said about the EU candidacy that serves as a big carrot to reform the country. But I would like to ask you about the political willingness of the Ukrainian leadership to reform the country, and especially, I mean, the judiciary reform, which has always been a great obstacle in Ukraine, as it serves this lack of reform. It serves for the politicians to gain advantages in the political competition, internal political competition. So, to put it shortly, is Zelensky ready to deliver with this reform?
Ukraine is the democracy. Despite being emerging transitional democracy, we are the democracy where the Ukrainian authorities are very much caring about what their voters want. And Ukrainian voters, 92% of people want Ukraine to join the European Union, which is a very powerful, and by the way, 83, I guess, % of Ukrainians want to join NATO. That's the recent poll, which the figures which I saw very recently. This is a super powerful tool in the hands of the European Union, but also civil society and all of the reform-minded partners in generating political will of the authorities to do these reforms. Whether they will be very enthusiastic in doing these reforms, well, that would be, you know, a little hypocritical saying so. But it is absolutely doable. Because if you take a look at the history of promoting of anti-corruption and rule of law reforms, throughout entire process since 2014, the political will was generated by the Visa Liberalization Action Plan, IMF programs, macro-financial assistance programs, and very clear and concrete conditionalities. And this judicial reform, which is right now ongoing, it was also generated, by the way, by the conditionalities of the international assistance. So to answer your question shortly, yes, I think that it is generatable, and the tools and instruments which we received, EU candidate status, conditionalities of the recovery funds, conditionalities of the further IMF assistance, further European assistance, will be a very powerful boost for all of the reforms in the future.
Okay, thank you. Last question to you, and the same question will go to Paweł Kowal. As one of your, Olena, capacities advocating for support for Ukraine in the West, I mean, how do you see the readiness in the West to continue with support or even to enhance it? I mean, first of all, the financial support.
That is indeed a very good question, because according to the different estimations, in order to just keep our country, keep our economy running, we need a few billions of dollars monthly. And what we are seeing right now, there are not so many international partners willing to help us with this money on the monthly basis. So we saw much more willingness and readiness during the first month, and right now it goes down. Obviously also because international partners and countries themselves are facing their own domestic issues, which were, by the way, caused and weaponized by with Russia using energy as the weapon against the European Union, but also against the entire world, and using the Russian-made food crisis in order to cause inflation worldwide. That is why it is incredibly important to think how we can sustain this international support. And here I would like to draw everybody's attention to remind that there are still 300 billion of Russian Federal Reserve funds, which are right now seized but not yet confiscated. It is incredibly important that this money is confiscated and sent to Ukraine for our urgent immediate needs, which also include the recovery of the critical infrastructure, because Russia is targeting our dams, power plants, electricity stations, and they want to freeze Ukrainians during the winter, and then to channel part of this money for the recovery. That is why for us it is critically important that Russia is recognized the state sponsor of terrorism, because this tool and instrument will help to lift the sovereign immunity over Russian funds and to start the process of the confiscation. It is very important to work with this money, because that could be the source to support Ukraine in the course of our survival and path to victory over this genocidal war.
Yes, thank you. And pretty much the same question to Paweł Kowal. Will the West stand with its support to Ukraine, and how long?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. And I will say a few words about reconstruction process and about one element which is, from my point of view, really important. I think that reconstruction should be, of course, based on the few principles. Reconstruction as a modernization process, as a process of preparation to European integration, and as a process of de-oligarchization, fighting with corruption, and one element very important from the point of view of Polish interest, but not only. It's a reconstruction process as a process of strengthening relations, especially company to company and cities to cities, self-government to self-government. And I think that the main important postulate from my point of view, it should be to prepare a legal framework in Poland to include to that process Polish self-governmental organization, but not only directly self-government, but also cultural institutions, but also communal services, etc., etc. It could be really important, not only from finance point of view, but also especially for the future as a base for the good relations in future. The question about
readiness of the West to support
about that special connections between Putin's policy and the reaction of the West. I think that the main message for today is that from point of view of Putin, not the new troops, it's important. From Putin's point of view, I think important it's two another questions. And energy crisis in Europe, especially social and political consequences of that crisis, and the consequences for support for political forces which are ready to support war in Ukraine. President Zelensky is right that he's in the last time frequently used the phrase "winter is coming," and the winter will decide. It's how to understand that phrase in the context of war and forthcoming months. That a few forthcoming months will decide about the shape of the new political order in our part of Europe. Because Putin wanted to use energy to cut support in many European, especially European countries, for the governments which are engaged in a war in Ukraine. The same situation would be, but not only based on the energy issues in the US. We should observe the forthcoming elections in November, because the result of the elections will real influence into policy of Joe Biden's administration. The second question is a threat. It's a threat which is traditional weapon. It's a nuclear threat. It's a traditional weapon in the hands of Putin's hands. Not only Putin, it was used traditionally in the Soviet Union, and I would like, on the end of my short answer, to underline that element which I call Khrushchev's complex, Putin's Khrushchev's complex, that Putin had. Putin many times mentioned Khrushchev as a feature, as a historical feature, and in my interpretation, it's a question of effective using of nuclear threat against West, against society in the West, and
was removed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was removed, and the consequence for the internal situation
that
in the
cannot
empire.
deliver.
Yeah. And do not concentrate on the new mobilization in Russia troops. We should be concentrate on that two elements in the hands of Putin, to use energy and nuclear threat.
Thank you. I very much subscribe to what you said about that this next winter months will be crucial. And if we stay united, as Mrs. Commissioner said, then perhaps we'll be much better prepared and much less vulnerable in the next months. But I would like to draw your attention again to the EU and ask you, do you see the notion within the EU that reform has to reform itself before it expand, not only to Ukraine, but also to Western Balkans? Do you see that as a real need, or as an excuse, or as a pretext not to bring in the new?
From historical, from historical point of view, the answer it's very easy. All historians and all experts which are which know history of European Union knows that there is a type of blackmail, political blackmail before every expansion of European Union, that that the political forces concentrated on the developing of integration, wanted to integrate more before the next step of expansion. It's a tradition. It's not very new. They will that postulate to change institution, to change treaty, to be more integrated, would be for sure a part of discussion before starting of accession negotiation with Ukraine and Moldova. But For sure, we have a special moment in history of European Union, before COVID and before war, and for sure it could be easy to postulate to integrate European Union on the field of defense and on the field of public, let's say, of the health. It is two natural fields of strengthening of process of integration, but concerning defense, it's a very traditional conservative and right-wing postulate from the time of Churchill's speech in Zurich. And Adenauer postulate, it's a deep tradition of European Christian democratic forces to postulate to integrate more in the sphere of defense. And Pope Pius XI also spoke about them when was. Okay, this is one element. Mm-hmm. A new element is health, for sure, and it would be element of trading in context of starting of negotiation with Ukraine. I would like to add only few elements which we can realize without any changing, without changing of treaty, without changing of rules in European Union. We should more integrate Ukraine now in a few fields. For example, Committee of Regions of European Union. It's a good place to invite as a permanent observers, partially members, participants from Ukraine and Moldova, and in my opinion also Georgia. We cannot leave Georgia in that context. Second idea, to be open. It's a postulate to European Parliament. It's not obstacles to invite to European Parliament as a permanent observers, representatives from Verkhovna Rada and Parliament of Moldova and also Georgia. It could be from the political point of view, very visible step, but not very problematic. And we have tradition to have in European Parliament, for example, permanent observers from the countries which are in the process of preparation to European Union.
Thank you. Thank you for all these short answers and our three short conversations. I would like to move to the audience and grab some questions. Mattia, please.
Thank you. I'll try. Yeah, thank you. My name is Mattia Nellis, and until this month I was working on communal development in eastern Ukraine, so for a German technical development agency. And I wanted to address the question of, we all assume Ukraine will win militarily, but the question is the scenario under which Russia will not admit its defeat and will continue to, even when it's pushed beyond maybe even 2014 borders, it will continue to lob rockets on Ukraine or continue to strike targets in Ukraine. And I wanted to address Mr. Boris, under what circumstances will companies or what insurances and what frameworks do we have to establish that companies come back? Because as of now, the big German organizations are operating in Ukraine only with skeleton staff. International organizations similarly operate only with skeleton staff, and German companies want to return to Ukraine, but they find it nearly impossible to think about the insurance risk. So how do we factor in a scenario where there is neither war nor peace? And how many big companies will return under which conditions, and help to reconstruct Ukraine? Thank you.
Yes, sure. So I was working part-time in Ukraine for 6 years between 2010 and 2016. I was responsible for our bank in Ukraine, Credo Bank. And I know that also before the war, the environment for making business in Ukraine was challenging. From the macro stability perspective, so inflation, yield, high interest rates, currency stabilization, environment for companies, transparency of procurement processes, so on and so forth. And now, of course, Ukraine, especially over the prior to the war, especially over the last few years, made a lot of progress, a lot of reform to create more friendly environment for the business. But unfortunately, the war have started, and if you put together very unstable macro environment with huge 0-1 risk of the war, that you build some facility and one day it could disappear physically, of course we all understand that making investment decision is very, very difficult. However, this is why I underlined during my first comment that international financial institutions are all involved in the process of reconstruction of Ukraine should provide this risk-sharing guarantees for the business. It could be guarantees, insurance, so that companies would be insured for specific kind of risk, especially connected with the war, but political risk, this type of risk which already exists in typical ICA framework, which means that Export Insurance Agency could insure a kind of risk of the country. It could be risk sharing, first lost, this type of instrument, but I believe they would play critical role in attracting investors to Ukraine because they will give a comfort which is needed to invest real money in the country. But at the same time, I believe that the local business also needs a kind of protection. So I believe in Poland we have very good experience with the minimis guarantee for the small and medium enterprises, because I believe that if everybody are talking about the oligarchization of the economy, so Ukraine should put a lot of effort to strengthen the small and medium enterprises, but they need access to credit, they need good legal environment, and also this type of guarantees in the banking sector which will make better access to loans on maybe with some also preferential interest rate will be very important to support the local businesses and facilitate investment growth, because also local business will have the same challenges. So generally public institutions, whether they are international or local, should provide business with some level of extra protection of specific macro risk or the risk connected with the war.
Thank you. And Irina wanted to react as well.
Yeah, if I may, though Matteo was not addressing his question to me, but I will anyway want to jump in here, because every time when I am asked about what are our plans, what are our thoughts about the recovery, I start my answer that first you need to help to win us on the battlefield, because we may be talking about the insurances, guarantees, taxes, supports for the local businesses, big businesses, etc. we have to realize that a big part of the recovery funds would be private funds. And with Russia not defeated fully, should it be like ceasefire, temporary peace deal, whatever? No, it's not gonna work, because the only real security guarantee is Ukrainian victory. And this, working on the recovery should not be used by certain countries and certain international partners as an excuse of not providing us the assistance necessary to win this war on the battlefield. And there is the answer how to protect the businesses from the rockets, missiles that are flying. This is strong air and missile defense systems, which we are advocating for. And we started receiving that from the United States. We are very grateful. One is coming from Germany. We are very grateful, but we need much, much more. We need tens of them. So it's very important to keep working on winning this war, and then, talk about the recovery.
Yes.
I wanted to
Shortly,
add only one element, because the oligarchization and, generally speaking, oligarchy, it's not a problem of money for the rich people. It's a problem of whole social system after the war. It's a question of middle class. It's a question of regulations which will support the middle class, but not oligarchs, etc., etc. And it's also links with agriculture system. It's a very serious, deep problem, which we could see in the general context of the money for reconstruction.
Thank you. And 2 questions here, and that will be last questions, as we are behind the schedule already. Please. Yes, sure. Mic is going.
Yeah.
I see.
Center for Environmental Consulting and Auditing Ukraine. Thank you. Back in 90s.
Specify to whom you are.
Yes, actually, it will be relevant to all participants. Back in 90s, Poland was very successful in implementation of so-called mechanism, debt for nature swap, due to which $3 billion were forgiven to Poland, but in exchange, Poland established Eco Fund, which financed infrastructure projects. So, do you think that for Ukraine it will be applicable example? And if it would be beneficial to make sure that such sort of organization would operate under the auspices of German Marshall Fund? So it was a question.
Very specific. I think you are the most appropriate person to take it.
So I fully agree what was said, that Ukraine need to first win the war, but I would like to underline that Poland is not at war. However, we also see a problem with investors coming to Poland now, because their perception of the risk is higher. So anyway, I believe that this type of instrument will be very relevant after the war, because the perception of the region have changed, and it won't change from day one to another. Maybe it will change in one generation. Answer your questions. Yes, Poland have negotiation with Paris Club, the agreement with different partners, and we have created different funds. But I believe that a critical element of the financing of the recovery was what have already been said, to seize and confiscate all these foreign reserves of Russia. And I believe that now the Western partners should send the money to Ukraine in amounts which are really needed. As I'm aware, Ukraine needs by the end of the next year $40 billion US dollars. But as quick as possible, they should create a legal framework to really compensate this support with reparations financed by the seized reserves. And of course, this could be also the way, source of financing of some debt forgiveness for Ukraine or settlement of this debt. So I wouldn't see this in the way that some country will, there will be some debt forgiveness and there will be some kind of fund. Rather, I see that there could be a debt settlement financed by Russia, and this money will be also sufficient not only to forgive debts, but also to create some additional substantial sources of funds for different programs and investments.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all the participants. Thank you the audience for asking questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please don't leave. We will start the next panel in 8 minutes. It's going to be very interesting and a very important and relevant discussion about the accountability for Russia and justice with a very high-level speaker. So please get back in 8 minutes.
It's good that you bring your toys with you. Never leave home without them.
Good afternoon. My name is, Ambassador, you're here. Thanks. Please have a seat. I have a privilege of moderating this panel. My name is Ernest Wyciszkiewicz. I'm the head of the Miroszewski Center, the Polish public institution based here in Warsaw that was established to foster dialogue between Poles and nations of Central and Eastern Europe. But today we have a very unique topic, crime and punishment. But this is not going to be about Dostoevsky, at least not today. The question is much more serious. How to make Russia responsible for the crimes of aggression committed after February 24th, but not only. But first, let me briefly introduce the panel. And we have an honor to host directly from House of Representatives and U.S. Congress, Steve Cohen, who will take the floor to give us some opening remarks to the topic. He's a co-chair of U.S. Helsinki Commission, also directly involved in supporting NATO and also countering Russian aggression, being a sponsor or co-sponsor of many acts of U.S. Congress that actually were helping Ukraine to win and to also helping Russia to lose the war. Then I have a privilege to introduce Andriy Kostin, Prosecutor General of Ukraine, so the key state institution responsible for investigating Russian crimes and atrocities committed as we speak, unfortunately, on the territory of Ukraine. Then Ms. Olha Ewazowska, who represents the board of Opora, Civil Network, and also International Center for Ukraine Victory, responsible for a lot of civic initiatives also to document those crimes and to help also other institutions to understand what has been happening in Ukraine. And last but not least, Mike Carpenter, permanent representative for US and to OSCE, a lot of experience in US Foreign Service, in the Department of State, Defense, NSC, White House. I don't know, madam, because I haven't heard about your participation in the panel. So it's a bit confusing situation, embarrassing to me, but that's a question to organizers. So if you could say just a few words about yourself.
Я потребую перекладу. Вибачте, моя англійська недостатньо гарна, аби вас не мучити, я попросила переклад.
I will help you with translation. This is Yulia Polyeska. She's a Ukrainian paramedic. She was recently released from Russian captivity. Her English is not very good, so she will be speaking Ukrainian, and I'll be her modest translator.
Thank you very much. Sorry, but I have not been informed actually before the panel, so that's why there's confusion. So first, please, the floor is yours, Congressman, and for your opening remarks to this debate.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the German Marshall Fund and the Warsaw Security Forum for having this forum and inviting me to participate. I am a member of the United States House of Representatives. Honored to be so, and honored to have the opportunity to support Ukraine in all of its endeavors, and have done so since the beginning of the war. I think that anybody that is of sound mind and peaceful instincts and has a good heart would support Ukraine. As our moderator said, this is not to be about crime and punishment. It's to be about another Russian novelist, War and Peace. And that's what we're looking at is war and peace, and hopefully we will have that. And what happens during the peace? I spoke at the Human Dimension program of the OSCE earlier at the here in Warsaw, and I brought up Robert Kennedy's speech that he made delivered in 1966 at Cape Town University called the Ripple Speech, and I was encouraging people to get involved in putting out the word about prisoners of war like Vladimir Kara-Murza and so many others, so that they're not forgotten. That's the worst thing that can happen to a prisoner of war, is to be forgotten. And we need to remember them and remember why they are prisoners and what they stand for. And I went back to read the speech where Kennedy talks about students and how they can stand up for ideals, stand up against illegal actions, and speak up for the truth. And all those little talks can form little ripples of hope that come together in energies and synergies that create a massive current that can wipe down the mightiest walls of oppression. And that's what you remember from the speech, and that's what it's known for. But it's a major speech, and it talks about, this is 60 years ago, about the problems man has in defending and supporting democracies and rule of law and Western thought. It was about civil rights and segregation in South Africa and opportunities for people, independent of their ethnic background, their racial background, whatever, to thrive and to have freedom of speech and freedoms that communist regimes did not allow. And I was thinking how what Robert Kennedy spoke about in '66 is still present today. And while Russia's not communist, once KGB, always KGB, and Putin brings that same idea to fore and has no respect for individual rights and is trying to commit a genocide and taking acts of genocide in Ukraine. I've introduced with others a resolution to have what's happened in Ukraine declared a genocide. We hope to get a hearing before the Foreign Affairs Committee, but we don't know if that's going to happen or not, but it should. And I've not taken the position necessarily on terrorism and whether Russia's committed acts of terrorism and needs to be declared a terrorist state. I kind of think that they meet all the criteria. There's some difficulties in the politics in America and where the State Department is and what they want to do with Russia eventually and the opportunities to maybe help in the eastern parts of Ukraine, which Russia calls the prizes of a special military operation. But we need to, there are political considerations there, but there's no question that if Cuba is a terrorist state, Russia is a terrorist state. North Korea, we've declared a terrorist state. I'm not sure, I mean, it's kind of awful to send these little missiles over Japan and sends the people of Japan hearing air raid warnings and being kind of freaked out about it, which is understandable, but that's nothing compared to what Russia's done. Russia does it, you know, hundreds of missiles every day. North Korea does one little show and fat boy comes out and smiles and everybody thinks, oh, it's a terrorist state. Well, it may be, but nothing compared to Russia. So we've got those issues before us, how we legally deal with the peace, how we try to make Russia responsible for some of its actions by taking its assets and the assets of its oligarchs and folks who have taken the prizes and after the fall of communism and taken them as their own, been given them and making these tremendous accumulations of wealth, good for the yacht industry, but not necessarily good for the people. Those two things don't go in concert. And we have taken a large amount of Russian assets in America and held them, and we want to hold more. The assets of the oligarchs, it's about $300 billion we estimate that are possibly available. We've got $30 billion we've taken or have from the banks. Well, it's just the opposite, $300 billion from the banks and $30 billion from the Russian oligarchs. But we would like to use that and work in conjunction with our allies to help rebuild Ukraine after the eventual successful defense of the independent and sovereign nation of Ukraine. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to do. And I have allies in Congress helping me with this. The problem that we might have in the future is there are some Republicans who now support us, and my colleague on the Helsinki Commission, Mr. Wilson, who is the ranking member, often comes to people and says, which is true, how Congressman Cohen and Congressman Wilson, he are together on this program. Who would have thought that something could bring Democrats and Republicans together, he says. Well, there are lots of things that bring us together, but there's lots of differences too. And if the Republicans take the House of Representatives, which is a possibility, probably more likely than not in the November elections, God knows what will happen. Because there are certain Republicans who are of the Trump ilk, who are America first, who are not interested in necessarily anything that is going to necessarily help democracy and help the world, but are interested in putting a Republican in the presidency first and foremost. So if Biden's for it, they're against it. If Biden's for hot fudge sundaes, they're against him. Just simple as that. So there are dangers that we face with the election, but the Democrats are solid in support of Ukraine, and we try to intend to take that to the nth degree. I guess we've talked about genocide and we've talked about terrorism to the extent that we can. That's our hope and our purpose, and I yield my time to whoever is next on the panel.
Thank you, Congressman. I heard there was a collision of opening remarks, so I was asked now by the organizers to give the floor to Ms. Pajewska to provide us with her thoughts on the conflict. So please, the floor is yours for just a brief, concise remarks, if I may ask, because we do not have a lot of time. Thank you.
Okay. Коли я відкрила очі після того, як прийшла в себе до тями після катувань, чергового катування в застінках російських, знаєте, яке було моє перше відчуття?
When I first opened my eyes from another session of torture from Russians in their captivity, do you know what was my first feeling?
Не злоба, ні.
I was not angry, not.
І не, як це, ярость.
And I was not angry, outraged, sorry.
Мені їх було жаль.
I was pitying them.
Моїх катів.
I was pitying my torturers.
Тому що я розумію, що вони є найголовніші жертви і найперші жертви цієї війни.
Because I understand that they are the first and foremost victims of this war.
Тому що все, що вони роблять, пхає їх у прірву.
All they are doing is pushing them to their abyss.
Закатовані діти, жінки, старі.
The tortured kids, women, the old people.
Все, що вони наробили,
all they done,
вимагає справедливості.
This all demands justice.
Не помсти.
It doesn't need revenge.
Ніхто не хоче помсти. Ми просто просимо справедливості.
No one wants revenge. We just want justice.
Тому що якщо ми почнемо їм мститись, ми скатимось до їх рівня.
Because when we start our revenge, we will be on their level.
Українці цивілізована нація.
Ukrainians are civilized nations.
Українці визнають силу закону і міжнародного права.
We recognize as Ukrainians the power of law and international law.
І тому я дуже прошу справедливості, саме справедливості для моїх закатованих побратимів, для дітей, котрі були зґвалтовані більше ніж 10 особами.
That's why I'm asking for justice for my tortured brothers and sisters, for the raped children.
Діти, немовлята.
Kids, the newborns.
Вони це з ними робили.
They raped those kids.
Я дуже прошу вас звернути увагу на цю проблему.
I sincerely ask you to this problem.
І у вас, можливо, теж з'являться емоції, коли ви захочете помститись за це.
maybe we will have some emotions to get revenge about this.
Але ми мусимо стриматись і застосовувати виключно закон.
But we should calm ourselves and use only law against them.
Мені їх щиро жаль.
I sincerely pity them.
Але допоки перемога не досягнута,
But as long as we didn't reach our victory,
повна справедливість неможлива.
there would be no full justice.
Але всі ці злочини вимагають покарання по закону.
All these criminal offenses should be punished by law.
І розслідування кожного злочину, кожного.
Each and every offense should be properly investigated.
Жертви Маріуполя, Бучі, інших міст України, безвинні, цивільні, вимагають справедливості. Я дякую вам за увагу. І я надію, що ви не полишите нас в цьому на самоті. Дякую.
Thank you. Thank you for this emotional but also very sober appeal to all of us. We need to remember that because of the people that are suffering for many, many months in Ukraine right now. I'm really glad that we have with us Mr. Andriy Kostin, the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. You know almost all what had been happening in Ukraine when it comes to investigating Russian crimes. If you could give us sort of the map in a couple of minutes, comprehensive map of those crimes and atrocities, so that we could understand where we are actually when we will be presenting the war bill to the aggressor when it loses the war. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak, and thank you for my fellow colleagues in this panel who spoke before me. When I talk to our partners, our friends and allies, the word justice is probably the most used word by me. And this is the difference between our country, our nation, and Russian aggressor, that we respect law, we respect international law, and we as Ukrainians, as Ukrainian nation, need justice. This is the basic difference. Since the war in which we are fighting against Russian aggressor, it's not the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's the war between whole civilized democratic world and total evil. This total evil practically ruined the basics of international law. They started at 2008 in Georgia. Their next step was much more severe in 2014 with annexation of Crimea and occupying the part of eastern Ukraine, the part of Ukrainian Donbas. And then, without proper response from the international community, especially proper response based on the international law, they started full-scale aggression in 2022. Now, I feel and I believe that whole democratic world is united with Ukraine in order to fight for justice, not only for Ukrainians, but to prove to everyone that rule of law means more than rule of force, than rule of law, that rule of law prevail over the rule of force. And we all need to prove ourselves that the basics of international law would be restored. This is our joint fight for justice. And coming back to what my fellow colleague mentioned, we as Ukrainians and we as Ukrainian state, we are fighting for full accountability of the aggressor. Starting from the very first days and weeks, starting with our cooperation with International Criminal Court, which has a jurisdiction over the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. We, in parallel, at the same time, started to find a way to make Russia's highest political and military leadership accountable for the crime of aggression. We all understand that the ICC, due to legal constraints, has no jurisdiction. And the only way, we understand that we can't use the facility of the Security Council of United Nations because it would be vetoed by, as I say, at least one permanent member. And we all understand that the special tribunal to prosecute and to punish the crime of aggression is another, not only important, but another element of the system of full, broad accountability of the aggressor. We also started at the same time to work on the mechanism of reparations. And we are grateful to our partners who have frozen, who have found a lot of assets, not only Russian sovereign funds, but also private assets of companies and physical persons who helped, assisted the aggressor to start and to proceed with the aggression. Now we have it's our joint task to find out the mechanism which will allow confiscate these assets and to compensate the damage caused by Russian aggression to Ukrainian people, to Ukraine as a state. And we all understand now that it will be not enough. But we know that this system we are communicating and negotiating with our partners will be fair and transparent. But for many countries, they need to adopt their legislation in order to allow them to confiscate this property without long criminal proceedings, because our partners are also countries with judicial system, with rule of law, but for that reason, a political decision should be found. Because if everyone understands and everyone from democratic world voted for resolution of the General Assembly confirming that the act of aggression was committed, then all of us need to go ahead and to be very straightforward, principled and strong in order to Ukrainians to receive this compensation, which also would be an element of justice for every Ukrainian. We specifically mention by our team, talking about compensation mechanism, that it will definitely include not only compensation of material damage caused by Russians to Ukrainian property, even private, I mean, starting from with private property, flats, apartments, cars, anything was lost and damaged. But we also secure the specific amount. This is our aim, and this is we are very principled to provide compensation for all of the victims of all war crimes committed by Russian aggressor, for the families who lost their relatives, for those who were wounded, for those who were tortured and raped. The specific fund will be provided to compensate. I understand that this is difficult to compensate, but this should be done because it's the minimum we can do for them. I initiated and created a special unit, division with the Office of Prosecutor General, which will be dealing with conflict-related sexual violence crimes. It's already in place. We have prepared a strategy of investigation of these type of crimes together with special representative of the UN General Secretary, Pramila Patten, which we have launched during the high-level week in New York as a side event of General Assembly. We hope that in coming weeks, the office of Pramila Patten will be opened on the ground in Kyiv. We all understand the history, especially the history of several, of probably all of the conflicts on the territory of former Yugoslavia, in which many victims of sexual violence, they failed to receive justice because the system was not very well prepared. Not only the judicial system, but the victim-oriented investigation and prosecution of these crimes was not in place. Now we are in another situation. We have huge support from all of our partners to provide the victim-oriented investigation and prosecution of these crimes. We understand that much more victims had not yet reported because of different reasons, because of their fear, because of their trauma, and we believe that giving them best international practices and ensuring that they will be treated in the best possible manner, we will inspire them to come and to tell. I just wanted to inform you about another initiative. We understand that many victims and witnesses of war crimes who are safely now located in Europe, who fled, who maybe lost everything, and they are in despair, and they need to survive. But by the help, due to help of European nations, they can do it, they can leave. But they are also a little bit reluctant in reporting about the cases of where they have been victims or witnesses of war crimes. So we will start very shortly communication strategy. And the main message from myself will be, we need to win this war. War on the battlefield and the fight for justice. And maybe the only thing they can do to make their own input in our victory would be just report what they have witnessed or about their situation. And for all of this, we need to be united. We need to communicate openly. We need to be transparent. One more minute. Yesterday I spoke at the unique event in Paris. It was Night of Law. It's annual event in like anniversary of their Constitutionary Day. And we have a very interesting discussion about the role of civil society organization in documenting war crimes, finding evidences, and providing them not only to us, the Office Prosecutor General, but also to the international institutions. So this role is very important. And I underlined this yesterday, and I would like to underline this today. So, coming back to my main message, we will go ahead until we win in our fight for justice in all segments of the accountability of aggressor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for covering both the crime and the accountability flank. And I'm happy for those last words because we have a privilege to host Ms. Iwazowska, who actually does a lot of work on the civic society level when it comes to documenting crime. So if you could please do a follow-up on what you do, how you address all those suffering that actually Ukrainians are now coming through in Ukraine. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for these patient words, because it's very important to know that we are talking about political will, not just rules, because Russia tried to broken the international order and international legislation or decision which were made by societies and civilized world after the Second World War. And now we are fighting for new order. That's why civil society in Ukraine and Ukrainians are trying to documentize as much war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide cases as it possible on the field in Ukraine. We have a great coalition who are working with this issue and abroad, because we already have more than 6 million refugees in Europe and other countries, and they are eyewitnesses too. They lost their homes, their relatives, families. They escaped from occupied territories, and they have to be under the attention, not only Ukrainian state or Ukraine or general prosecutor, but under the attention of our partners because of their jurisdiction to start investigation in Poland, in Estonia, in France, Sweden, and so on and so forth. And we are very happy that joint investigations team was established. Now we have to understand how officials and authorities in different countries may communicate and participate on investigation with civil society, because some of the countries abroad do not have and didn't have such experience at all. In Ukrainian reality, civil society and NGOs started to fight for their rights, for human rights, for many years ago. And we have some skills, knowledges, and we are very cautious on that, and we are very visible. But in some of the European countries, it's not so easy to do. just to communicate, to call to prosecutor or to open the doors for investigation or invite them. But we decided to open the Center of Documentization of War Crimes, and what we are doing, we started this preliminary interviewing of the people of Ukrainian refugees who left Ukraine, who are not under the Ukrainian jurisdiction now, but who want to have justice too. That's why we believe that we have to do like lessons from last 7 months' experience and last 8 years' experience, because war didn't start on 24th of February. And we know very well that the act of aggression became a reality for us in March 2014, when Russia decided to annex these territories. And the world were not so loud as now. And many countries accepted that reality. Of course, they are not officially said that Crimea is a part of Russia, but we have had to fight step by step on a daily basis that Crimea is Ukrainian territory. That's why people there is under Ukrainian jurisdiction, and Ukrainian state has some responsibilities, but some rights and obligation to fight for these people and investigate the crimes which are going for many years against Crimean Tatars, against civil activists, against media, and so on and so forth. And we understood that we can documentize tens of thousands of crimes, but it doesn't mean that headquarters in Russia, big fish in Russia, will be under the investigation. That's why we find it only one solution. And I'm talking about establishing special tribunal against act of aggression. And we have already this case with Sierra Leone, when the president, which was on the position, which had a mandate, were under the investigation. It's very important not just start this process symbolically, because everyone are talking that it's so easy to investigate act of aggression. Everyone knows that act of aggression happened, but establishing of such tribunal will help Ukrainian citizens to have some hope for the future perspective to build accountability and justice against everyone who did war crimes in our territories, and again those people who made that decision to start this war in 2014. And this has a direct relation and connection with reparations, because I believe that Russia, after Putin, has to pay for the, not just for atrocities or war crimes in Ukraine, but has to pay for recovery in Ukraine. And it's about punishment of each and everyone in Russia, because each of the taxpayers have to pay money for recovery of new modern post-war Ukraine. And this is a solution, because it's about lessons learned for next generation in Russia. About tribunal, we are fighting for that. We are advocating this idea. And what we see in Brussels, in Hague, in many other capitals in EU, that it's so easy doing, but it's about political will. So we have to make this political will. Because if we will start investigation against Putin, Putin will be toxic for everyone, for third countries, for global south, for Asia, for, I don't know, China, and many, many other countries. How to talk and negotiate with Putin about anything, about economy, relationship, and so on and so forth, if this person will be under the investigation. And we believe that UN, for now, can be a platform for establishing such tribunal. I'm talking about from the NGO side. I'm not sure that my state will not continue to work on this track. But what we see, we can waste in time, patient, resources, but will not have success. And we have to be effectively oriented on resultative process. And because of Ukrainian status, the status of Ukraine as a candidate to a membership in EU, we have to understand that if we are going to be a part of EU in far future, now it's a time from EU side to help us establish this special tribunal. Because bilateral agreements in between Ukraine as a state and EU as an international organization will be faster and will be easily to promote the ideas to join other countries to this process, like Canada, Japan, the USA, and others. I heard many times from lawyers in Brussels or some other capitals which are thinking about justice and accountability that we can't have access personally to Putin. That's why we don't want to start investigation, because he will not be in a room of the new founded court or tribunal. And then Ukrainian society will be very disappointed. But from our side, it's very important to say that Ukrainian society will be disappointed if everyone will talk that it's easy doing thing to establish this tribunal or to adopt the decision that it was an act of aggression, but nobody will do anything on a practical stage, on a practical level. That's why I'm calling to help us not just collect the data about war crimes. It's very, very important because it's about truth. But to think about tribunal as a tool to stop Putin and to stop future Russia, which will continue to fight against Ukraine. Because this war wasn't start even in 2014. This war was started when Stalin became a leader, like mental leader of new Russia after the collapse of Soviet Union. This war was started because Soviet Union were not punished after genocide in Ukraine, after the Second World War, when nobody counted Ukrainians, which were dying. And in between 75 million victims, 10 million were from Ukraine. 10 million. That's why I'm calling to Germany to be more brave, to stay with us. Because Russia didn't win the Second World War. Ukraine and Ukrainian nation were in between those who stopped this awful page of our history. And my last point, that tribunal, it's for brave people. And peace, it's not about deal. I saw articles already in open sources when opinion leaders in EU started to talk that justice versus peace. Justice can't be versus peace, because justice, it's an end game of this war. Justice, it's about not just victims, it's for new generations of Russians, which will not start new war against Europeans, Ukrainians, or other states. So please, do not continue to share this narrative that we will have peace, but through the deal without justice. Justice is an end game. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, Ambassador, if we could make a full circle now to the question and to the panel, how can we make Russia accountable? If you could reflect on that, and also trying to answer maybe to what our Ukrainian colleagues said about their vision of accountability. How do you see that from the US government perspective?
Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers for convening this extraordinary panel. The United States position is very clear. We are supporting all of the various different accountability mechanisms that have been discussed on this panel. And I want to sort of go through the various different levels at which the Russian Federation has attacked the rules that we all have subscribed to for so many decades, because there's many different levels to this. There's the interstate level, where Russia has violated the very core tenets of the international order, to include the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-violation of borders, peaceful settlement of disputes, etc. On another level, Russia has attacked the core tenets of international humanitarian law and international human rights law through its systematic efforts to target infrastructure, including critical infrastructure, as we've seen over the last few months. But then at the very human level, we've seen attacks on the very principle of humanity. This goes to the crimes that are so horrific, to the mutilation, the torture, the rape of children, the things that are so unspeakable, that are beyond the bounds not just of law, but of human decency. So at each of these various levels, we have seen an attack on principles that I think all of us, for most of our lifetimes, perhaps we saw in the former Yugoslavia and some other places, in Rwanda in previous decades, violations, but violations on a scale now by a permanent member of the Security Council that we've not seen before. And so challenging not just the international law, but basic concepts of decency. And so our principle is to empower all of the accountability mechanisms, to include the work that is being done by Mr. Kostin, and we have seconded experts, we have provided support to your office, we will continue to do that to ensure that Ukraine is the primary jurisdiction over these crimes. The crime scene, as Prosecutor Cohen called it after visiting Bucha, that is where the primary locus where accountability takes place. But we're also supporting, my country is not a signatory of the Rome Statute, but we are supporting the work of the ICC to bring cases as well. We have filed an intervention with the International Court of Justice to be able to support Ukraine's file against Russia with regards to genocide. And then we are supporting other national courts that are going to exercise potentially universal jurisdiction to bring accountability for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and potentially genocide. So we're doing all of the above, and including, we're looking now carefully, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to the legalities of this, of how to establish a special tribunal that would look at the crime of aggression, which goes to the first level at which Russia has attacked the international system, at the very most basic level of interstate behavior. But this is something that we have not excluded, that we are willing to support if we can find the legal pathway to make that happen. It's very important that we do this for the sake of justice and accountability, so that those who have perpetrated these crimes are held accountable. But there's also, because I am ambassador to the OSCE, there's another reason why it's very important to talk about accountability and to talk about specific crimes in the here and now. Because when the war began on February 24th, and I was one of those who was going out and speaking publicly about the fact that there was likely to be a full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine in the weeks before. Not a lot of my colleagues believed me, but we were saying it time and again. We were warning that this was going to happen, that it was going to be a catastrophic humanitarian disaster. And I used those words in the Permanent Council prior to February 24th, saying this is going to be crimes and humanitarian catastrophe, the likes of which we have not seen for decades, using that language. And that is why it is important now to document and to talk about what we are seeing, why it's so important that Tyra is here also on this panel to talk about what she witnessed, what she saw with her, what she endured with her own eyes, with her own body, with her own emotions, and with her own conscience, because there are still people who are being raped and tortured right now as we speak, because there are, in our estimations, at least 260,000 Ukrainian children who have been shipped against their will, torn away from their families, and forcibly deported to Russia. And we can't forget about the crimes that are happening now. There's justice, there is accountability, as you say, is the end state, that's the end goal, but there's also a need to mobilize the international community, some of our partners, especially in the Global South, who don't necessarily see these facts for what they are, and who don't understand that the quickest way to stop these atrocities from happening is to give Ukraine the means to defend itself, to push back Russian forces, to get them out of Ukraine, to stop the carnage that is happening in Ukraine today, and that is happening in Russia against Ukrainians through the so-called filtration process, which brings to mind another set of camps and another process that took place in the 1930s. We need to end it now. And so we need to document it. We need to be not afraid to talk about it in sometimes undiplomatic terms. And we have to, frankly, morally compel our friends and partners around the world to act with us, so we bring an end to this. And then we seek justice and accountability at all levels of the chain of command. Thank you.
Thank you. Since we have been having an extra panelist, for which I'm grateful for, I think I can assume that we have some extra time for questions from you. I think there's a unique opportunity to ask 2 or 3 questions to our guests. You, madam, first, then you, and you, sir, and that's it. Please be brief, concise, and address the question to whoever you wish.
Hello, my name is Olena. I'm from Ukraine. So I wanted to ask about, are there instruments at place to keep records of Ukrainians that are being kidnapped by Russia, and is it at all possible to keep those kind of records? Because later people may not be able to come back without the help of international organizations, maybe, and actually can the international organizations assist somehow us in recording the names of people who were kidnapped? Thank you so much.
We collect 3 questions and then we will have a round. Yes.
Alexandra Matvichuk, head of Center for Civil Liberties. Maybe it's not even a question, it's a remark. We strongly support, as Ukrainian civil society, the establishment of special tribunal on aggression. But aggression is only one from the 4 international crimes. We have war crimes, we have crimes against humanity, and we have genocide. As a human rights lawyer, I'm sure we will be able to prove it. And the problem is that we face with gap of accountability, because for current moment, we are in a situation when Ukrainian legal system is overloaded with an extreme amount of crime. The International Criminal Court restricts its investigation only to several select cases. And the question is, for me as a human rights lawyer and as a human being who documented this war crime for 8 years, who will provide justice to all victims of the war crimes in this war? Who will provide justice to Tyra, to Yulia Payevskaya and her tortured to death friends? So I think we need to speak about special tribunal on aggression, but also we have to speak about complex justice strategy, how to strengthen the ability on the national level and on the international level to face with this challenge, and how to involve international element into the level of national investigation and national justice in order to do it effectively. I will finish with this, that I work with people who survived the hell for 8 years, and I know for sure that above and beyond their ruined lives, their ruined families, and their ruined visions of the future, these people strive to believe that justice exists.
Thank you. Sir.
That's a tough one to follow. My question regards media's role in this, and maybe looking a little bit towards the U.S., but also in the broader context of it. What role do you think, or would you desire for media to play when we talk about the United States as we enter a lame duck session coming up, and on a world stage? What role can the media play in reporting this? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have 3 issues: instruments, international organizations. One more voice? Okay, just the last one, but please be brief.
Good afternoon. I don't have questions. I just want 1 minute of your attention. I'm the sister of the defender of Azovstal plant. He's one of those who were defending Mariupol and Azovstal plant for more than 80 days in complete surrounding. And they were 24 hours a day, they were under enemy fire. Russia used their all possible weapons that they have, bombs that hit bunkers, artillery from land and sea, even phosphorus bombs, and that was real hell. And unfortunately, that hell changed for them to another, and it is captivity. Our soldiers, large amount of our soldiers are now in the Russian captivity in Olenivka. And we can say that it is Auschwitz of nowadays. It's difficult to believe, but in the center of Europe, Russia has made concentration camps where our soldiers suffer every day. Young men and women, the future of Ukraine, they're slowly dying there. The soldiers who were released, they have signs of severe anorexia, dehydration. They talk about inhuman conditions of being in captivity. They tell about starvation and thirst, about the lack of medical care, no conditions for hygiene. And so we have just a dream. I have a dream to see my brother alive, to hug him, and be back to help us to rescue our loved ones from that hell. And it is impossible to survive there. You know that Russia carried out a terroristic attack in Olenivka, where a big amount of soldiers were killed, and so we can't allow others to perish there. We appeal to the whole world, to the whole international community, to help to rescue our prisoners of war. And we ask to make monitoring committees to go to the places where the prisoners of war are kept, to check their health status, to check those conditions, to make humanitarian convoys to bring their warm clothes, blankets, medicine, etc., because winter is coming, and there is a big doubt that Russia will give them something like warm clothes, blankets, and etc. And of course, our main goal is to release everyone and just to make our dreams reality. I want just to see my brother alive and to hug him and to feel happiness once.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.
That's difficulty, how to connect the human suffering that we have been witnessing, and it is going on as we speak today, with a legal political debate about intricacies of how to make international organizations more effective, what kind of mechanism to use to organize around this war. I know it is difficult to answer those questions actually today because the case is pending, and we need to think in ways that, in unprecedented ways, and new out of the box maybe instruments should be elaborated. But if you could please take some of those issues and try to have your final remarks, just please go ahead. Prosecutor.
I will start with the last words. I see she's gone. Anyway, when I was a member of the parliament and talk with our international partners, I usually talk about the need of weapons, ammunition to resist and then to win. When I became a prosecutor general, at every meeting, I'm talking about weapons and ammunition. Because to win the war on the battlefield means also to win the war for justice, because they are interconnected. It's understandable. But if we think about this more precisely, what we have at the moment, due to weapons and ammunition and support, we have liberated the big part of our territory, and we have captured a lot of prisoners of war criminals from Russian army. And this raises our opportunities for, I don't like the word exchange, but to take home, to get home all our heroes who are now illegally and unhumanly, forcibly located under the control of the aggressor. So this is quite logical structure. More weapons, more ammunition, more support. We liberate our territory. We capture more prisoners of war, war criminals of Russian army, and we will have an opportunity to take our heroes home. So this is, for me, it's very simple, but there is the easiest way to do. And also, I mentioned as Prosecutor General why we need weapons. Because among those whom we capture, we find war criminals for whom we have already evidences, for whom we have already information about what they have committed before on the territory of Ukraine in other parts. And we have such information. And among them, there will be people who will be prosecuted and convicted. So we also definitely need weapons for justice to win.
Thank you.
Very, very short answer to the first question. I believe that there are enough partners who have good intelligence service which can help us to find people in Russia, to use satellites as it was used for understanding how many filtration camps are across Ukraine, but not small like analytical groups in Yale University or some other institution, but to join as much resources, minds, smart people, intelligent tools, and so on and so forth, to find them. And we know that we are living on the cyber world already. So there are enough cyberspace evidences who did what. That's why we need to develop something like blacklist of those criminals who back to Russia, but we know what they did here, not here, but in Ukraine, or with us, with Ukrainians. That's why intelligence services can help us to find the people, and international partners can help us to aware people which escaped from Russia already to Estonia, Finland, and so on, but they are scaring. They don't know what will happen with their relatives on occupied territories. They don't know that we are talking about private data, that prosecutors on the ground will protect this data. And this is about role of the media, because many Ukrainians who were under the occupation or who are victims of war crimes and crimes against humanity, they regularly think that this is a norm, because war is going. That's why we have to aware people what does it mean, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, why it's important to talk with officials on those countries where they are now, and to develop not just joint investigation team for exchange the information on investigation the cases, but to join intelligence services, which can help us to find our citizens abroad and in Russia too.
Thank you. Ambassador.
If I could, I'd just like to answer the one question on the role of the media. I think it's very important for journalists out there today to not lose sight of this story and what is happening in Ukraine, because this is really the front line of, as the co-chairman Cohen said, this is the sort of the front line between autocracy and democracy, between really good and evil in the world today. And too many editors I've read too many stories about the fate of Russians who have been mobilized and personal stories about their suffering. And let's reorient the narrative and the focus onto what really matters. And I know that for operational security reasons, there are a lot of journalists who are prevented from going out into the East and covering the war as it's unfolding. And all of that is fine and well. But in the early days of the war, we had correspondents in Ukraine reporting from Kyiv on a daily, on a nightly, on a hourly basis. And I was also glued to the TV then, because I just couldn't tear myself away from those images. But we've lost that. And so I appeal to journalists not only to dig in and do the tough work and do those investigative stories, and do the field work that's necessary. But talk to your editors about where are the priorities. I mean, too many times I switch on the TV and I see just complete fluff pieces on stuff that's completely irrelevant to what we're living today, which is the largest land war in Europe since World War II. So the media has played an important role in galvanizing world public opinion, but we're sort of, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but some are falling asleep at the switch. And we can't afford to do that because the stakes are too high. We need to have that opinion, not just in like-minded countries, but everywhere with us. And so talk to your editors, convince them that talking about what's happening in Ukraine should be on the front pages. It should be the lead story, right? That's where we need to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Congressman.
Thank you. I just have to concur with what's been said, but I guess, part of my journey here was to be at the Human Dimension program of the OSCE, and this is security. And there's such a direct connection. And this lady's testimony was testimony, her heartfelt longing to see her brother. It brings it home. You don't get that from television. You don't get it. You can, I guess, get it through television, but it's not the same thing as seeing it in person. We visited with some refugees. We came here on Monday, and the ladies, two of the ladies came to tears. I imagine this lady, when she left, might have been in tears. Is she here now?
Yes, she's here.
All right, well, if you want to address her again, you can, but the council made clear that we're going to try to bring all of the prisoners home, and that's his mission, and he wanted to direct that to you. But this is just such, to hear you and to hear others who are personally affected really brings it home, and I'll take it back to America. This is a continuation from World War II. It's narcissistic personalities, sociopaths who have got no conception of you as an individual or your brother as an individual, but just the idea of power and land territory and historical relevance as they see it. And that whole ego sphere which leaders have and which Putin exhibits all too well needs to stop, because it's been going on for too long and too many people have died. But we are on the front lines of good and evil, and you're right, this is evil, and we don't know what he'll do. I just think we need to escalate in the war in America. I think we've done a good job on providing weapons. I don't think we've provided enough. I think we need to give everything we can, and if Putin does something crazy, you can't stop crazy from being crazy. And so we need to do what we can to try to get this war concluded and Ukraine's victory sooner, because the longer we wait, there'll just be more deaths and more sorrow and irrevocable injuries.
Thank you. Ms. Paevska, the last word for you.
Я просто хочу нагадати, що непокаране зло відродиться знов.
I just want to remind you that not punished evil will return again.
І навіть після повної перемоги за допомогою вашої зброї і наснаги наших вояків,
even after the complete victory with the help of your weapons and the valor of our soldiers,
вони через кілька років, десятків років наберуть сили знов, і ми знову отримаємо війну, яка вже може бути загрозою для всього людства.
In few years, in few decades, Russians will gain to the power once again, and we will get another war.
Тому що для них виробництво зброї – це найвища мета.
Because the production of weapon is their highest aim for them.
І всесвітнє панування.
As well as the global superiority.
Це те, що казали мені мої кати в катівнях.
That's something my torturers told in their torture chambers to me.
Нам не треба ці destiny.
We don't want this destiny for us.
Я думаю, вам теж не треба.
I think you don't need it as well.
Я прошу справедливості і дякую за допомогу.
I ask for justice and thank for help.
Thank you for this powerful message at the end. What I take out of this first is something that we have been talking among each other within the center, and you, Ambassador, mentioned this word, old-fashioned decency. I think sort of international decency accords should be something that we could think about, how to define the behavior that is welcomed by the civilized nations of the world. And the last point is very simple. I mean, we should stand by Ukraine. We should wish not only Ukraine, but we should us its victory. And we should provide justice as soon as possible, not just to the peoples of Ukraine, but also to the state of Ukraine. So with that, let me please applaud our panelists. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your speeches.